If you get whooped with a rod of iron, it hurts more than a broom straw. Verse 8, who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Israel became a nation on one day. Right? That morning she wasn't. That day she was. That night she was attacked. Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Just for instance, go to Psalm chapter 48. Now I got a question as we're going over there. Anybody remember the year that Israel became a nation?
48.
Oh, okay. In Psalm 48, let's read verses 4 through 8. For behold, the kings assembled. They passed by together. They saw, and so they marveled. They were troubled. They hasted away. Fear took hold of them there. Pain as of a woman in travail. Uh-oh. Talking about how the nation be born today. Okay. As you break the ships of Tarshish with an east wind, as we have heard, so we have seen. In the city of Yahweh Sabaoth, in the city of our Elohim, Yahweh will establish it forever. Selah. 1948, Israel became a nation. I think it's kind of interesting that Psalm 48 talks about Israel becoming a nation and one day, going all the way back to the prophecy and all these other things. Go back to Isaiah 66, again in verse 8. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she gave birth to her children. Shall I bring to the time of birth and not cause delivery? Says Yahweh. Shall I who cause delivery close? The womb is implied. Says Eloheka. And then in verse 10 he says, rejoice with Yerushalayim. Uh-oh. You don't say go rub them out and do your own thing. It says rejoice with Yerushalayim, and be glad with her, all you who love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all you who mourn for her, that you may feed and be satisfied with the consolation of her bosom, that you may drink deeply and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. For thus says Yahweh, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the nations, or the Gentile, like a flowing stream. Then you shall feed. On the sides shall you be carried and be dandled on her knees. You know, imagine a woman, you know, carrying a baby. You know how they carry them on the side, or when they sit down, you know, and they bounce them on their knees and they coo it and talk and say all this baby talk stuff. Men don't do that, right? To be dandled on her knees as one whom his mother comforts. So I will comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Yerushalayim, in the city of peace. When you see, your heart shall rejoice, and your bones shall flourish like the grass. The hand of Yahweh will be known to his servants, and his indignation to his enemies. For behold, Yahweh will come with fire, with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword Yahweh will judge all flesh, and the slain of Yahweh shall be many. You know, this passage in relation to Hanukkah, we all know that back at in 165, somewhere back in there, you know, the king of the Roman legions and the king of Syria was sent down to create a Gentile state in the nation of Israel. And they came in and destroyed the temple and killed a hog and spread blood all over the temple and the altar and all that kind of stuff. A man by the name of Antiochus or Antiochus, depending on what scholar you're listening to, he declared himself, you know, Epiphanes, God manifest in the flesh. And that was a fulfillment of the prophecy that Daniel spoke of, the abomination that makes desolate, okay? And then in Matthew 24, Messiah is speaking to people, and he told them then, he said, when you see the abomination that makes desolate that Daniel spoke of, he jumped right over Antiochus or Antiochus, didn't he? He's saying when you see that in the future again, it's going to take place again, is what he said, right? Then he said, what, you better what? Head for the hills, or you're in trouble. Then verse 17, he talks about here, he said, those who sanctify themselves and purify themselves. My. Again in Isaiah 66 verse 17, those who sanctify themselves and purify themselves among the gardens is what that really, in the Hebrew. Following an idol or after an idol, or following a leader, or following somebody that they put ahead of Yahweh. Following an idol, a leader in the midst. Eating swine's flesh. And the abomination, word abomination there means filth. And the mouse, number there 5909, it means a rodent, shall be consumed together, says Yahweh. That word consumed there, or be consumed, actually means terminated, or come to an end. Same thing, isn't it? Verse 18, for I know their works, they shall be consumed, says Yahweh. For I know their works and their thoughts. It shall be that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them, and those among them who escape, these are called refugees, right? I will send to the nations, to Tarshish and Pul and Lud, who draw the bow, and Tubal and Yavan, to the coastlands afar off, who have not heard my fame nor seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the Gentiles, among the nations. I know that over in the Greek, in the New Testament, the commentary, it says that all this gospel shall be preached in all the world, and then the end shall come. But according to what he's saying here, this end is going to come with Yehoshua, and he's going to make sure that his word gets heard to those that haven't heard it. Doesn't it say that? My fame nor seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations. Then they shall bring all your brethren for an offering to Yahweh out of all nations on horses and in chariots and in litters, on mules and on camels, to my holy mountain, Jerusalem, says Yahweh. As the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel into the house of Yahweh. It's kind of like in the end of time, everybody's going to know that Yahweh's chosen people are just exactly who he said they were, and everybody's going to grab one and carry him up and take him to Jerusalem. Isn't that kind of what it's saying? Carry him up, lifting them up, okay? That's kind of like we read some being daddled on their knees, or being. Somebody's going to say, you was right. Verse 21, I will also take some of them for priests, Levites, says Yahweh. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says Yahweh. That word make there is 62:13. I'll say it's to redo out of something, not to create from nothing. Not going to create something that's never been. He's going to remake what it had become. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says Yahweh, so shall your descendants and your name remain. Your descendants and your name, there's going to be a lot of people alive who make it through the tribulation. They're going to be alive, and their name is going to continue. Then when the river of life, goes out, and the river flowing out with the trees of life on both sides of it, and they eat from that and will live just like they were originally in the garden, right? And he put them out of the garden so that they wouldn't eat of the tree of life and live forever in their sin. And then he says in rest of 22, so shall your descendants and your name remain. Verse 23, and it shall come to pass from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says Yahweh. This is in the future. Do you think people are going to be able to pick 1 in 7, or just pick any day you want, or just pick any day you want to, and just do however you want to do, or just do however you feel? Or is he saying, no, all flesh is going to worship before me? How? From one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another. His word that he spoke in the past is going to be in the future. I don't know how people can get away from that. Verse 24, and they shall go forth and look. What are they going to look at? Upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed against me. For their worm does not die, and their fire is not quenched. There's a lot of places it talks about that. One of the most important is in the Gospel of Mark, isn't it? Where it talks about their worm shall not die. We're not going to get there today, but we're going to talk about it later. But over in Revelation, the first 2 people who get thrown into the lake of fire alive or the false Messiah and his false prophet. Is that not true? And that's at the beginning of this 1,000-year period when Messiah is ruling and reigning on the earth, right? So the first two that are thrown in the lake of fire alive get to be looked upon by who? And they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed against me, for their worm does not die and their fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. That's kind of the sign, is it not? Now in Revelation it talks about when he comes and the false Messiah and false prophet thrown in the lake of fire, Satan is bound in the pit. He won't be let out, until the short season at the end of that 1,000 years. Somebody's going to have to be out there later on then to what? Entice them away. And then it says Satan's going to be let out for a short season, and his whole purpose is to go out and what? Bring all the nations, the people together again to do what? To come against Jerusalem. And then they're going to gather up against Jerusalem again. They'll be gathered around the city, and what's going to happen? Fire is going to come down out of heaven and just and a lot of ashes laying on the ground. We see the same thing when we go back and look at Isaiah or Elijah. When he was up on the mountain, or Elisha, whoever it was. When the army went out there and he's up on the mountain and they said, you're going to come to us, or come with us, we're going to take you back to Ahab, right? And he said, I don't think so. And fire come down and 51 ash bodies laying on the ground. You remember that story? And they sent somebody out there, and the third group went out there and they finally got smart and they looked around and said, if you want to, you can come with us. Takes a while before people get the point. Go into the book of Mark. Isaiah chapter 66 is a fine chapter. It doesn't talk a whole lot about what went on in the past, but it sure talks a whole lot about what's going to be in the future. Or at least it seemed like it to me. The Gospel of Mark in chapter 7. Most of it, and I want y'all to realize, one of the main things that I'm concentrating as we study the Gospels is the words of Messiah himself, okay? So in verse 1 it said, Then the Pharisees and some of the scribes came together to him, having come from Jerusalem. Now when they saw of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. Now this chapter starts off talking about them eating with unwashed hands. Verse 3, For the Pharisees and all the Yehudi do not eat unless they wash hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. And they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and there are many other things which they have received and hold, like the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels, and couches. You mean there's a lot of traditions and rituals they do. Then the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, Why do your disciples, students, not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? They found fault when the students of the Messiah quit doing what they were teaching. Right? Isn't that what's happening today? When we start doing what Messiah says and quit doing what everybody else is teaching, they get real upset. They can understand why we've gone away from the traditions of men. Verse 6. Oh, actually in verse 5 again. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why do your students not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? He answered and said to them, Well did Isaiah prophesy of you, hypocrites, as it is written. Remember, the word hypocrite comes from an old Greek word, which means the voice out from under the mask, going back to the Greek theater, and back then, they didn't have makeup, they had these masks, it was a good face or a bad face, or whatever, they switched masks. And there was always this voice that came out from under the mask, and that's where we get this word hypocrite. It's the voice from under the mask. You put on a show of one thing, but the voice says something else. This people honors me with their lips. Now he's quoting what from Isaiah 29. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. If you just look at that statement just a little bit, he said, the people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They can say something, but what they do is entirely different from what they're saying. Right? In the Gospel of John, Messiah said, if you love me, keep my commandments. They say they love him, but do they keep his commandments? Is there any difference in that today as what there was back then? And in vain or worthlessness they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Is that happening today? I don't understand how people have so much trouble reading that and understanding it. Except that the enemy has got them deluded, got them blinded, got a veil over their eyes. They can't see the truth. Remember, it's the same way. It says, you know, that when the Yehudi themselves read the ancient contract, the Torah, their eyes are veiled. But when they turn to Yehoshua, then the veil comes off. It's when people today make the decision to Yehoshua, I want to do everything that you have for me, and I want to walk in obedience to you, then the veil comes off, and you begin to see and understand. It's not until you've repented and turned back to him. When you repent and turn back to the Torah, you're repenting and turning back to the Word made flesh. Is that true? You can't say that you're repenting and turning to him and ignore the Word, because he is that Word. In vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of Yahweh, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things you do. And he said to them, all too well you reject the commandment of Yahweh, that you may keep your tradition. For Moshe said, honor your father and your mother. And he also said, he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is korban. It's a Hebrew word, and it means, you know, dedicated. Now, they got to the temple in there, but he's saying, you know, just dedicated. And they're saying, whatever profit that you might have got from me, you just consider that dedicated to Yahweh or to something else. And you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother, making the word of Elohim of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down, in many such things you do. You know, if we go back and read the letters of Paul, and a lot of things that he was fighting and combating were some of the same things that's being taught today. I mean, he wrote to some of those people, he said, what are we supposed to do? Just go out here and sin because we're all under grace? And the more sin we commit, the greater the grace we make it? Isn't that what he was saying? What are they saying today? What's the difference? Verse 14, when he had called all the multitude, he said to them, hear me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him. What's he going back to? The original statement, why do your disciples eat without washing their hands? Nothing that enters a man from the outside which can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are the things which defile a man or make him impure. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. Oh my. Now we go back to the ears, you know, like the ears of corn. Shibboleth, shibboleth. You know, who knows the true. And when he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he said to them, are you thus without understanding also? They didn't even know what he's talking about. Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him? He's talking about if you get a little dirt on your hands and you eat it. Isn't that what he's talking about? Because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach is eliminated, purifying or purging all foods. And he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. Now he's talking about something else. That word, verse 19, the word food is the number 1033. It's the Greek word brochma. I guess you know, B-R-O something M-A-H. I got to look at that and I'm thinking, I wonder if that's whether we got the word bromoseltzer. I don't know. Broma. The word itself in the Greek, 1033, it means food, i.e. articles especially allowed by Torah. My. Now, if you look it up, you know, it'll give you the articles. The word itself, out of the context, just says, you know, it's the food or articles especially allowed or disallowed by Torah. So it mentions both. But in this particular thing, he's saying, thus, you know, purifying all food. But what did he say is food? In verse 20 he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. That word defiles there is the number 2840 and is the word profane. That's what profanes a man. And then in verse 21 he says, for from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, the evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. If you look up all those words, that means just exactly what they said. All these evil things come within and make a man profane, what it says in the Greek, 2840.
Evil eye means something different.
Yeah.
Stingy.
Evil eye. The definition of evil eye means stingy. Actually, evil eye means when you see someone who has a need, and if you don't strive to meet that need, then you have an evil eye. If you see someone with a need and you meet that need, then you have a good eye, if it's within your ability. Verse 23, all these evil things come within and defile or make a man profane. And verse 24 through 30 here. This passage of Scripture we're going to have to look at more than just this one place to get the whole thing. If y'all notice that you kind of have to pick things out of all the different Gospels and put them all together in order to get the complete story. Verse 24, and from there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. I don't know how many of your Bibles have a little asterisk or a little note there by the words and Sidon. But most of them will go back and they'll say that, have a little asterisk up there and they'll say that there's one Greek translation that omitted the words and Sidon. And it'll tell you that's the NU, which is the eclectic Greek text from the Nestle Aland.
Doesn't count.
Yeah, anyway. From there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and wanted no one to know, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast a demon out of her daughter. But Yehoshua said to her, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Did he call her a dog? And she answered and said to him, yes, master, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. What she's saying, yeah, there's a lot of things that he's given to the children, and they don't want it, a lot of them. And what the children don't want, the little dogs will eat. And he said, what? Then he said to her, for this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter. And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out of her daughter lying on the bed. Go over to Matthew chapter 15. Just see if that one adds a little bit more to the story. Starting in verse 21. Verse 21, then Yehoshua went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. They don't have no note there, so it's actually in the text. How many of you ever heard the term, the Synoptic Gospels? This term is applied to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And these three are supposed to be known as the Synoptic Gospels because they match up so much and so closely among the three. But John is not considered part of the Synoptic Gospels. In fact, I had a man tell me one time that probably the book of John was written by a Kabbalist, a guy who was into spiritual things. But only because so much of what John talks about is in association with the Father and His Son, okay? And we meet an awful lot of who He is through the Gospel of John. And remember, John is the only one that was known as the Beloved, okay? But in verse 21 of Matthew 15 says, then Yehoshua went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, now over there in Mark we're told that she was born of Syro-Phoenician birth. Here it tells us she was of the land, a Canaanite, lived in the land. Who populated the land? Syro-Phoenicians, all those, And then she cried out, have mercy on me, Yehoshua, son of David. My daughter is severely demon possessed. My goodness, she may have been of the land, but she knew who he was. But he answered her not a word, and his disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she cries out after us. The disciples have been saying, this woman been bugging the heck out of us, and they're telling him, get rid of her. And how long has she been crying out to him? And he answered her not a word. He kind of ignored her. Isn't that the implication from the text? And his disciples came and urged him, saying, Send her away, for she cries out after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent, except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Master, help me. But he answered and said, It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. We got that far in Mark, didn't we? And she said, True, Master, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Even the little dog knew where the crumbs came from. Came from the master. Then Yehoshua answered and said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Great is your trust, right? I mean, he's equating faith and trust in what this woman knew of who he was.
The food man.
Food man of the life, yeah. Let it be to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. I think it's kind of an interesting thing. Going back to Mark. In verse 31, Mark chapter 7, And again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came to the midst of the region of Decapolis, to the Sea of Galilee. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. I don't know why he did that. Okay. I have no other words that I can associate this with, you know. Verse 34, Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, and I don't know how you pronounce this, it's E-P-H-P-H-A-T-H-A. Ephphatha. That is, be opened, okay? The word here in the Greek is the number 2188. But the word goes back to the Hebrew word 6606. Okay? So actually he's speaking Aramaic. Okay? And if we want to verify that the definition of that, you know, Ephath means be opened, we can go to Daniel 7. And we can find this same word in Daniel chapter 7 and in verse 10. I think this is kind of interesting because here he's talking about the words of Daniel looking forward to the end of time. We're going to read in verse 9 and 10. And in verse 9 he says, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. That sounds a lot like Revelation. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. That also sounds kind of like some of the words in Revelation. The court was seated, and the books, Ephphatah, were opened. It's the same word Messiah used when he's speaking. Okay? Be opened. Put his fingers in her ears. Yeah, that number there is 6606. The books opened, or be opened.
The whole statement there, books were open.
Yeah, the books were open. Now, just were open or be opened is just the you know, we're open there. They're going back to Mark 7 now, and in verse 35 it said, Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. The word impediment, or the bond, or the bind, or the ligament, or the string, or the cord that was holding his tongue where he couldn't speak plainly. His ears were opened, and his tongue was loosed. And he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. In chapter 8. In those days, the multitude being very great, and having nothing to eat, Yehoshua called the disciples and the students to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar. Then his disciples answered him, How can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke and gave to his disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the multitude. And they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000. He sent them away, and immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. Verse 11, the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. A sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Remember, all the word before, the Torah and the prophets prophesied of what this man was going to do when he came, and everything that he's done has been in accordance with the word. Here is a man living, walking in obedience to the word. Why do they need a sign? But then how many times do we turn around and say, Oh, send me a sign of what I'm supposed to do, or we want signs. We must all be Yehudi. Because they all seek after a sign, and the Greeks, they just looking for some kind of new wisdom, right? Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than 1 loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven or the yeast of the Pharisees, and the yeast of the leaven of Herod. So they reasoned among themselves, saying, It's because we have no bread. Now he just took 7 loaves and fed how many? Now we laugh about this, okay? But think about what they're doing and what they're saying. Yehoshua, being aware of it, said to them, Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive, nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Does that mean then if somebody will not receive the truth of the word, it's because their heart is hardened? And it's kind of like Pharaoh. If the heart is hardened, they can continue, and they continue on. And each time they reject it, it makes it easier and easier to reject it the next time. Verse 18 says, Having eyes, do you not see? They saw him take them loaves of bread and feed all them people with it. And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. And when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, How do you do not understand? When he said what? Beware of the yeast of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. His word is him. When the people came to him, he fed them. Right? It didn't make any difference what was there. When you come to him, he can feed you. You don't have to be prepared when you get there. You just got to go. You just got to want to receive what he has to give you. You have to do something with it when he receives it, right? You have to make it your own. He's the bread of life. He can and will feed all who feed on him through the word, the true doctrine of him. The true doctrine of the Messiah is that word which the Father penned through Moshe, which speaks of him, along with all the prophets. Anything other than that word which came from the Father concerning the Messiah is false doctrine. We talk about false doctrines, right? When you go to him, you feed on him. What did Messiah say? If they had known the Father, they'd know me. But they didn't know him because they didn't know the Father. He told Philip, Philip, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. They didn't know who they're looking for. The word or doctrine of the Pharisees, or Herod, will feed no one. When somebody has never eaten a true meal, how the heck do they know when they're eating proper food? Right? Their doctrine is false. Go to Luke 12. In verse 1. In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples first, to his students first, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. It's saying one thing but doing something else. How many people in organized religion today would come to you and without any hesitation, oh yeah, we're all supposed to obey God? But then what do they do? Is that hypocrisy? Does it tell us we're supposed to beware of that? When he tells the people, he said, you'll know those who are true, you'll know them by their fruits. What is their fruits? Their obedience to the word. If they're doing what they're saying, then they're walking in obedience to Torah. They can be doing what they're saying and yet be going against Torah because they're not saying what Torah says. So you know them by their fruits when they're saying what Torah says and doing what Torah says. That's the difference. How do you test all the spirits? Back against what the Word says. Without the Word, you don't have any test. Is it any amazing thought then that HaSatan, the adversary, would want us to say, throw all that old prophecy and that old word and stuff away and just do what I tell you? Isn't that what the scripture says? That HaSatan comes as what? An angel of light? And his ministers is what? Ministers of righteousness. They make a good show. Go back to Matthew chapter 16. In verse 5 and 6, it said, when his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. Then Yahushua said to them, take heed and beware of the yeast or the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Yeast does not mean sin. Yeast refers to doctrines. And he's talking about being aware of the doctrines of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In verse 7, they reasoned among themselves, saying, because we've taken no bread. But when Yahushua proceeded, he said to them, oh, you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand and remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, how many baskets you took up? Nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000, how many large baskets you took up? How is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread? But you should beware of the leaven or the yeast or the doctrines of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not tell them, beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrines or teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Go through all of those things, and what are we talking about then? The difference between what the word of Yahweh says and what the word of somebody else says. Which is true and which is false. Aren't we reading over in Mark where he's talking about the traditions of men make the word of Yahweh have no effect? So if somebody's saying you're supposed to do something, the question is, well, why are we supposed to do that? Why? Maybe the easiest thing to do them sometimes is have somebody else say, well, why do you think we ought to do what you're saying we're supposed to do? Why should we do it? Oh, because we had a good time last year. That's not good enough. It doesn't match with Yahweh. Well, we had a good time the year before. Well, that doesn't matter either. Are we doing what we're doing because we feel good with the traditions, or are we doing what we're doing because Yahweh says do it? That's the difference. And that's a hard concept for a lot of people to accept and receive. Go back to Mark. In verse 22. Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. There's another one of them. Okay? The only explanation I can offer you, and I can't tell you that this is either true or not, except that in the Talmud, there is a discussion that written in their doctrines back at that time. A couple of things that when Messiah came he was going to do is written in the Talmud. And this is one of them. Even the one that talked about spit, mixing it with the dirt and making mud and sticking it in the guy's eyes. And then told him to go down to the pool and wash. Now I've never seen that in there myself. The only thing I can tell you is there's discussion about the fact that it was in there. And most of the people that were trying to follow the Pharisees, they just got really scared, you know. I mean, after all, you stop and think about it. If you really begin to believe that the man that you're in the presence of right now is the creator of this whole universe, is that not kind of an overpowering thought? When he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. The only thing that I can think of, and this is really not a very good explanation, but we're told the breath of his mouth, the ruach, the set apart, you know, everything that comes from him, right? Out of his belly, living waters, right? Word, breath, blowing, spirit, speech, anything, spit and mud, mix it up. It's the water of life mixed with the dirt. After all, the word that came out of Yahweh's mouth mixed with red dirt is what he brought to life in the first place, what he breathed the breath of life into him, right? All these things then point back to the creator of the universe and what he did. Those are the only explanations that I can look at that have any, you know. And I'm not trying to tell you to take that to the bank. Okay? Verse 24, he looked up and said, now he asked him if he saw anything. He looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. I see men like trees walking. My goodness, you know. Yeah, trees upright, walking, you know. Men look like trees. They're just tall, they're moving. And he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Are you going to say Messiah made a mistake the first time?
No, there's a meaning there. We're not doing.
Just for the fun of it, you go back in your free time and you study and you go through and you should pick up all the scriptures that talk about trees, you know, and write them down. Then you go back and look at all those stories about trees and being upright, and the word tamar. Remember tamar? You know, talking about cedar trees as being upright, and you look at all the things where it talks about trees. And where in the tree is where the men who, you know, sin die, right? And on the tree, word tree also means a gallows, right? Go back and look up all of it. Man, you're in for a fun
What about
trip.
in the green tree? What he says,
Yeah, if he did this in the green, what about in the
won't
dry?
do it in the dry,
Yeah.
yeah.
Verse 26, and he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. And the more he said, don't tell them, the more they told. Now in verse 27, now Yehoshua and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. Now Caesarea Philippi today would be known as Tel Dan, or up in the north, you know, above, you know, the Jordan River, up at the headwaters of the Jordan, you know. Caesarea Philippi, what's it called up there today? Where y'all went?
Yeah, tell him. Give me a minute, I'll think of it.
Oh, okay.
Caesarea?
Well, it is Caesarea Philippi, is what the scripture is
Oh,
referring
okay.
to, but in modern times it's called something else.
Oh.
Okay? I've got her now. She's thinking. I would have said it, but I'm forgetting. And I was there before, you know, when we were there before. But in verse 28, but he asked it, who do men say that I am? Now they're standing up in this place, the headwaters of the Jordan River.
Banyas.
Banyas. Okay, it's called Banyas today. Here it's called Caesarea Philippi. And they're standing there, where this water is coming up out of the ground, and it's cold, and it's maybe 40, 50 feet across, 2 or 3 feet deep, and it's, cool water. The rocks are up above it, okay? And over here on there's a cave up there. And if you look up into that cave, it's black on the inside, like fire is shot up there. And the cave goes back and back down into the earth. And that cave is called the gates of hell. And that's where they are in Caesarea Philippi on the road. He asked his disciples, saying to them, "Who do men say that I am?" And they answered, "Yochanan the Immerser. But some say Elijah, and others one of his prophets." Or one of the prophets. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered and said to him, "You are the anointed of Yahweh. You are the Mashiach, HaMashiach." Then he charged them that they should tell no one about him. Many times he told them not to tell, not to say, okay? When they went up on the mountain, of Transfiguration, he told them after they came down, he said, "Don't tell anybody what you've seen until after everything's over." Verse 30, when he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. What he's teaching them here now, he's teaching them what the Torah and the prophets are saying is going to come to pass concerning him. Is that what he's teaching? Verse 32, he spoke this word openly. Okay? And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Began to admonish him and so forth. Verse 33, but when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan," or Hasatan, "for you are not mindful of the things of El, but the things of men." Everybody likes to talk about Messiah calling Peter Satan. And then they forget about what the rest of the verse was. But the most important thing in this whole passage, look back up in verse 32, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. What was he rebuking him for? What does that word rebuke mean? Word rebuke is a number 3008, I think, or 2008, one of the two. The word rebuke actually means to censure or to admonish, or by implication to forbid him to do those things. Okay? Now, he's telling them about all the things that the prophets and the Torah said was going to take place concerning him. And Peter is forbidding him to do those things. That is like saying you can't do or you can't accomplish what the Word says you're going to do. Right? Well, who, Hasatan, goes against what the Word says? But he says to him, "Get behind me, Hasatan." He's calling him, "Get behind me, adversary," because when he's trying to rebuke him and try to get him to not accomplish those things which the Word calls out for him to do, then he's saying, "You're being an adversary to me." And he said, "Get behind me, adversary, for you are not mindful of the things of Yahweh." What he's saying is your mind is not set on the things of Yahweh, but your mind is set on the things of men. All he can see in him, if you die and go away, we're alone. And that's what men would think, but he's saying your mind is set on the things of men. They're not set on the things of Yahweh. And everything which Yahweh's Word said is what their mind is supposed to be set on. We have so much, in churches talk about him saying or calling Peter Satan. And I think they missed the whole thing of what the concept is. At least that's the way I was seeing it. I hope y'all get a little better understanding out of what he's saying. He's not just calling him Hasatan, okay? But then in verse 34, and when he had called the people to him, implied, with his disciples also, he said to them, these verses here through 38 are extremely important. "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his staros and follow me." He hadn't gone to the execution stake yet, had he? So what are they saying? What is he supposed to get from this? What are the disciples supposed to get from what he said? "Take up your stake and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it." The gospel of what? What did Messiah always teach? The gospel of the kingdom of Yahweh. And where did he say the gospel of the kingdom of Yahweh is? It's within us. And what we're supposed to eat is his flesh, which is this word. So where is the kingdom of Yahweh? It's within each one of us if we are eating and feasting and living on this word. If it's not, then what's in there? Then it's traditions of men. Traditions of men are going to go away. Verse 36, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? People are so willing to give up the eternal life or the joy of knowing, okay, for temporary pleasures on the earth. I can understand how hard it is for people to think back and say things, oh man, the most enjoyable time of my whole life was at Christmas with the family and all this kind of stuff. And we want to have that again. They want to redo that over and over and over. And they're not willing to recognize the fact that those temporary things, which are really against Yahweh, right? And they take the place of the eternal pleasure to come. And people can't see that. Nobody, if they really could see the difference between the two, would want to give up the eternal for the temporary. Right? So our job then is to try to help them to see by how we are the eternal as compared to the temporary. Because if they see it and we want them to see it, we're going to have to try to find a way to help them see what we see. That don't mean hitting them upside the head with a book. You know? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? The question is, what will a man give in exchange for your soul? But that's what they're doing. Maybe sometime we need to ask them the question when they're trying to get us to go in some of the other things. What are you trying to give up for your soul? You're wanting a temporary something or other which is not even real. Everybody knows the word, you know, and he said the Father's looking for those who will worship him in spirit and in truth, right? Well, what is spirit and truth? What is it? Is it what the word says or what somebody thinks? I'm not trying to tell people what to do. I'm trying to give you thoughts and ideas and insights so that you, when you're talking and dealing with the people that you love and that you want to reach, you know, that you can reach them with the truth. Don't always work for me. Maybe it'll work for you. But we have to find, and together we can find something that will help us reach, because we all want our families to be there with us, don't we?
Amen.
But notice he says in verse 38, he asked the question in 37, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? In 38 he says, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man also will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels, or the set-apart messengers. Who is he going to be ashamed of? Those who deny him. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words. And if he is the Word made flesh, and if the only words that come out of his mouth is the words that the Father sent, right? If we deny his words or the word of the Father concerning him, then we are what? We are ashamed of him. And people seek for some temporary pleasure, for something that right now going into some, you know, false tradition or doctrine of men, for some temporary something right now, and they're willing to give up the joy of eternal life with him for that temporary pleasure. We're going to stop right there for today, and we'll pick up in Mark chapter 9 next time. And thank you for your patience. That concludes the readings for this day.